Hey, Beady friends, it's Meredith from Beadalon. Happy New Year to everyone. I want to extend my warmest wishes from both myself and from Beadalon for a happy, healthy, and wonderful year where all of your dreams come true. It is my favorite class that I'm teaching today. This is the fundamentals of strung jewelry or strung jewelry fundamentals, where we go over from beginning to end everything that you need to know about making strung jewelry. I've said it before and I've said it again. When you walk into the beading aisle at Michael's, it can be a little intimidating. Even me, who, knows probably way more than any human being should about these things, I walk in there sometimes and I'm overwhelmed by the choices. You have a beading wall, a stringing wall, charms and beads and components and findings and a whole new vocabulary sometimes to learn. So hopefully today's class will break everything down and you'll leave with a little bit of a better understanding of what to go and grab when you first walk into, or if you're walking for the 100th time into the beading aisle at Michael's. I was scrolling through to see who is joining us in class today, and I see a lot of new names. So welcome new names. It's great to have new beaders here, new crafters joining us, or maybe you're just kind of curious and you haven't made strung jewelry yet and you want to know what it's all about. So please say hi in the comments. Let me know if you are a newbie, if this is your first class with me. And I know that there are a lot of people who've been joining me for months and years as we've been doing the classes for the Michael's Community Classroom. So those of you who know me know I love interactivity. So please go ahead if you have any questions, if there's anything that I haven't been quite clear enough on, just shoot a little note there in the comments and I'll be sure to readdress it if it's something that I am able to. Welcome, Amita. That's wonderful. Welcome, Kathy. I'm so glad. Oh, Jafia. Okay, well, welcome. And if you're watching live, obviously, you know that I am uh, responding to the comments as they are coming in. Welcome, Faith. Thank you. But of course, this class will be available to rewatch on the Michael's YouTube channel in about a day or two. What a wonderful service that Michael's has provided over the past almost coming up on 5 years now of making these amazing classes free in perpetuity. So big thanks to Michael's from me, from Beadalon, and from on behalf of all the beaders for having us and hosting us today. So wonderful. We are going to start at the very beginning. We're going to talk about wire. We're going to talk about crimping. We're going to talk about finishing off. And again, all questions and comments, please feel free to add them. We are also in the process of scheduling the first half of the year between me and Sarah Lovecraft, who also teaches classes on behalf of Beadalon. We had a big brainstorming meeting on Monday, taking some suggestions from students who've been in classes before. So please, if there's something that you're like, you know what, this is something I've been really hoping to learn in 2025, go ahead and drop that in the comments as well. And hopefully I'll be able to make some room for it in the schedule. Welcome back, Jacqueline. It's really, really good to have you back. All right, I think we're ready to dive in. I brought a whole bunch of things from my beading wall. I have the project that was featured, so we can talk about that a little bit. I'm just gonna bop my camera back a little ways so we can see everything that I'm talking about. And I think we are ready to just dive right in. So once you get started, or once you're getting started, let's say, and you're walking into Michael's and you're gathering some supplies, like I said at the top moment, it can get really daunting because there is a lot to know and a lot to consider when you're getting started. But after a couple of projects, it becomes just second nature. It becomes instinctive to know what kind of wire you want to choose and how you want to construct your piece of jewelry. So Felicia posted, and of course, if you're watching the YouTube video, this will be linked at the bottom of it. And then when you signed up for class, of course, this was also included as well. These are my 7 steps to to making a piece of strung jewelry. So really, you want to do step 1, choose your strand count. Step 2, choose your wire diameter. Step 3, choose your crimp beads and tools and the corresponding crimp tool. Then more design elements, your clasp. Think about using a wire guardian and a crimp cover, stringing your design, and then crimping. On the second page of this handout, if you didn't scroll down, there is also included the diagram, the 3-step diagram of how to crimp. And we're going to go over each of these items in depth in our class today. And again, encourage you to participate in the comments and let me know any specific questions that you have. All right, so step 1 and step 2 are really the most challenging I have found for beaders, new and seasoned, as well, is figuring out, okay, first of all, what do these things mean, and then how do I interpret them? So let's tackle those separately and together. We're going to talk about wire strand count and wire diameter. So the best way to talk about that is to grab some spools of wire. And I grabbed, let's see, I have a bunch of different wire. Let's see, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have 13 different spools of wire here. And you might think, well, doesn't one size of wire fit all? Why can't I just grab one spool of wire and call it a day? And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way with wire because there are 3 different strand counts and 3 different strand counts in Michaels. You've got the 7 strand, the 19 strand, and the 49 strand. So when I'm talking about that, I'm referring to this number right here. 7 strand, 19 strand, and 49 strand. And what this means, what this refers to, is the number of little teeny tiny wires that are individually bundled together in this wire. Those little teeny tiny wires are bundled together and then coated with nylon, and that is what gives you beading wire. So there's a lot going on in this stuff that isn't just, just the wire that you might take for granted. Now, at Beadalon, we actually make this stuff. We manufacture the wire. So not only do I work for a company that, sells all kinds of wonderful things, we actually make this. We strand the wire, we spool it up, we put the clip on, we put the label on it. We do all of that right up the road from where I'm sitting in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. So that is why we are so passionate and why I am so passionate about wire and how important having the right wire in your project is. And yeah, so and that is why. So sometimes it takes a little getting on. There you go. I put my clip back on the first time with a little bend in it, and I didn't want it. Again, crazy about wire, right? So we talked about 19, those numbers, 19, 7 and 49, 7, 19 and 49. But what does it mean, right? What that refers to is how flexible and how strong your wire is. So very simply, the more strands you have, the more flexible and the stronger. Okay, so 7 strand is good, 19 is better, and 49 is best. Okay, but you have to, when you're comparing things, you also have to be comparing apples to apples. And the other comparison number that's super, super important is the diameter. And the diameter is here. And these all have the same diameter, 015, 015, and 015, 015. Okay, so these are all going to be the same diameters, the same width, the same thickness of wire. And the way that that's achieved is by those little teeny tiny wires that are stranded together. So the 49 strand wires are much smaller, but there are 49 of them. So that makes them A, stronger, and B, more supple, softer, drapier, depending on how you want to look at it. So apples to apples or diameter to diameter, your best wire is going to be 49 strand. So you might wonder, okay, so if 49 strand wire is my best wire, well, then why is there 7 strand wire? Why would I choose that 7 strand wire, right? Well, it really comes down to a matter of economics because it's only 7 strands. 7-strand wire is much easier to produce, right? It's a lot more economic to produce and economical to produce. And therefore the price point is going to be less, right? And it only stands to reason. So maybe you are like one of the people in the comments just starting out. You're like, I'm kind of into the idea. All of these beads are so pretty and I want to put them together in this awesome design that I found, but I'm not 100% sure that I'm ready to do a deep investment in beading. Well, 7-strand is just perfect for you. And then, of course, our price points go up. And so then our 49-strand is going to really be for our professional jewelry. So anything that you're going to be selling, things that you're going to be gifting, you really want to, if you can, go for that 49-strand. And 19 strand is a really good middle of the road. Before I came to Beadalon and I had unlimited access to 49 strand, and I really understood how using wire makes a difference in my designs, 19 strand was kind of my go-to. It's kind of how I buy cars. It's kind of how I look at life. I'm not like, going for the super most economical, but also not the fanciest. I'm kind of a middle of the road kind of a gal. And Susie's got a great comment. She says, imagine bucatini, spaghetti, and angel hair pastas. They all have their place. Oh, and she says she loves 7-strand for earrings because it gives great structure. What a great comment. That's a really a good segue into another point to talk about when you're talking about um, the different kinds of wire. And I alluded to before it when I alluded to it before when I was talking about the softness, the suppleness, the drapeability. Sometimes you want something that has a little more structure to it. You have a necklace that you want to really be bold and hold its form more than just being very drapey. And that's a perfectly reasonable style choice. Actually, I'm going to bop my camera just a little bit more overhead so that we can see these a little more straight on. I think that's a better camera angle. I hope you agree. That's where 7-strand would also shine. So again, whenever I give this explanation, I'm very aware of how many words it is and how kind of long and perhaps dry. But it's important when you're making these decisions and figuring out what you want to use to make your jewelry to be aware of these things. So I alluded to, or I didn't allude to, I pointed out the different diameters. So here we have an 015, but we also have in these different diameters a 18, which is a little bit thicker. We also have 024, which is even thicker still. So depending on the size of the holes of your beads, that is what determines what your diameter is going to be. If you're going to choose an 015, and we even at Beadalon, we have thinner wire than an 015. We have down to an 010. So if you can think about a wire being almost as thin as a human hair, 010 is going to be that thin. So 010, we have 012 and 013 and 015. These are really good diameters for very, very small hold beads. Also very, very light beads. We also have, going through the spectrum, we talked about 018, we have an 021 and 024 and 030 and even up to an 036. And generally when I talk about diameters, I'm referring to the inches. It's just how we've always done it at Beadalon. It's how I've always done it as a beater. Some of our customers do talk about it in terms of millimeters, but I am almost always refer to it in terms of inches. And so that's how I teach it as well. So 024, 036, those are going to be even thicker. And I'm going to try, this is always the challenge. I'm going to move some of these off to the side, and I'm going to take out the 015, and I'm going to put it against an 024, and we're going to see, I can see it right here. But just to have a sense of the different thickness of these two wires. We've got the 024 on the left and the 015 on the right. Now, the general rule of thumb is you want to fill your bead holes as much as possible when you are stringing. This minimizes friction. It minimizes those beads rolling around and abrading the wire. Sometimes beads, especially gemstones, have very rough insides. And those very rough insides can cut through wire. The more you can alleviate movement in the beads by filling your bead holes with thicker wire, the better chance you'll have of making sure that those beads don't cut through that wire. It's so funny. I'm kind of chuckling on the inside. I've given this talk now so many times over the past 18 years that I have worked at Beadalon. So I'm trying to kind of switch it up a little bit and add a couple little tidbits here and there. So all of my beady friends who have joined me down this road before won't think I sound too much like a broken record. All right, so we talked about strand count, we talked about diameter, and then of course the last number on the spool that is of consequence is the spool length, right? So this is 10 feet and this is 100 feet. That's pretty straightforward. Lots more in the 100 feet rather than the 10 feet. You just want to be aware of it, right? When you're buying something. On the wall to just double check, if you're doing a lot of beading, you want to go for that 100-foot spool for sure. But if you don't need quite as much wire, 10 feet. Oh, Wanda, always with the good questions. Wanda is asking, she's leading me because she knows where I'm going next. She's heard this spiel how many times now? She's asking if a new beater could only buy one or two spools of wire, what would you recommend, Meredith? Okay, I'm going to answer that question. I'm also going to put it back to the gallery. I'm going to ask the seasoned beaters who are hanging out with me today, what would you recommend to a seasoned or to a brand new beater? And let's see if ours, um, if they line up. So for a brand new beater, and again, I would ask lots of questions. I would ask what you're doing, what kind of beads you're going to be using, what kind of are you using, freshwater pearls? Are you using gemstones? Are you using big chunky beads? Or are you using seed beads, right? Because all of these different things are going to affect the ultimate answer. But people want a quick and easy. So what I would recommend to a new beater, right? If you're going to just go in and you're going to buy one spool of wire, I would recommend 19 strand 018. We tend to sell a lot more of the 015 at Beadalon. I don't know why. But I do know that we do sell more 015 diameter 19 strand than we do 018. I mean, it's negligible, but 018 is what I would use not knowing what people are going to be beating. Let's see, I'm just looking through the comments. We've got a 19 strand, 7 and 19 strand, 018, and Wanda agrees with my choice. So thank you so much. So this spool happens to be a silver color. I would probably recommend a bright, again, more versatile, not knowing what beads you're using. But this brings me to my next point, which is our next decision that we need to make is color. So let's see, bring in the bright. And I think I grabbed all of the colors that are represented at Michael's. If I have forgotten one, I'm so sorry. But we have black, bronze, satin gold, satin silver, silver color, and then bright. And you can see it's a lot of different colors. Well, why in the world do you need different colors of wire? It's hiding behind the beads, right? So true, except when it's not, because you can play around with color a lot. First of all, and most simply, at the very ends here, I have a wire guardian on this piece. It's a little tough to see, but you are going to see a little bit of wire on the end of your piece. If you don't care what color wire that is, go for the bright or go for the cheapest, go for the most versatile. These beads happen to be translucent in the middle. I work with a lot of translucent beads. The beads we're going to be playing with today actually are also translucent. When you use silver color wire, or even the silver satin gold wire, those beads are going to have their color enhanced. It's going to be brighter from within. Um, it's just that little extra something something that makes your jewelry pop. And I'm willing to go that extra step when I'm doing my designing. We also at Beadalon, and I'm looking on my back wall right now to see, oh, I do. We have a lot of designs that we teach and a lot of designs that we do that actually feature the wire. This bracelet I did, I think this was the last class of the year last year. So the YouTube video will be up on the Michael's channel. But this is using the silver color wire. So if you did this with black or with bronze or even with the bright wire, it's going to change the effect because the wire is actually part of the design rather than just in the background. Again, this is red wire, but you can use wire as part of the design, as actually a featured part of the design. And that's when working with colors of wire starts getting to be really, really fun and exciting, is when the wire is part of the design. And again, we are a wire manufacturer, so we love when the designer or when the wire is the design. Because we love wire. We're kooky and crazy like that. And it's taken me a long time to kind of drink the Kool-Aid, but I definitely understand how important wire can be as part of the design. So let me just go back. My cheat sheet is now covered in spools of wire. But let's see, we talked about choosing our wire strand count. We talked about the diameter. And again, I just want to emphasize that choosing the wire diameter that's going to fit in the holes of your beads and fill them the most. And the size of the bead doesn't necessarily correspond to the size of the hole. So you just always have to be really, really careful and cognizant about that hole. All right, so Kathy and Sib are asking some good questions. So they're asking, well, okay, so why would I use beading wire over nylon string or over another material, right? There's so many different materials out there. Again, the difficult and or the shortest answer is it really depends, and I hate saying that, but the more clear answer is because wire is going to be stronger. It's going to be more durable, right? This is stainless steel. This isn't cotton. This isn't nylon. This isn't any kind of fiber. This is stainless steel. And these things have break strengths of like 20 pounds, 30 pounds. So if you think about what that means, and a nylon string is probably going to have a break strength of at the very most, maybe 3 pounds, 4 pounds. I'm pulling these numbers out of the air right now, but really just for comparison's sake. So if you have a wire that has a break strength and an abrasion resistance of 30 pounds. And then you have a nylon string that has a break strength and a resistance of like 2 or 3 or maybe 4 pounds tops. Obviously, the stainless steel is going to be the better choice. It's just stronger and more durable. That said, nylon string has its place. I'm not going to be doing any seed bead weaving or sometimes I I'm just looking for some examples over here. Um, if I were doing something like This design, this actually was made for me by Sarah Lovecraft. Something like this, I would use a nylon string. I would actually probably use a wildfire for something like this, because that's going to be even stronger than a nylon string. I know, Wanda, isn't that so pretty? That was a gift for me, for my friend Sarah. That's made me so happy. It's so beautiful. Because this is going to be a little, it's just not the right material, really, in my opinion, for making something like this. You could, but adding thread is a lot easier than adding this. Um, and Rut is asking which wire size is good for seed beads, 15 O's, 11 O's, or even 6 O's. Another fantastic question. So if you're doing just a simple stringing project with those things, I'm just looking to see if I have something over here. You're going to want to use probably an 015, and you can probably get away with a 7 or a 19 strand, no problem. An 0 and 5 diameter for any seed beads is really my go-to. Kind of depends on what's happening on either side. So for example, we're going to be using these size 6 seed beads, and they've got really big holes. So I could even use an 024 with those if I needed to. Wanda, again, with the good points, watching lots of BD tutorials will give you a good idea of what wire and cord to use for different kinds of projects. Because teachers and instructors who are worth being teachers and instructors always have good recommendations for what to use for a specific project. Okay, so next things next. I should time myself to see how long. We're about a half an hour on the explanation before we get to crimp tubes and crimp beads, but we're also asking and answering a lot of good questions here today. So I appreciate everybody's participation for sure. All right, so our spool's got a lot of information on it when you know where to look for it. So the next important piece of information on our spool are these little guys right here. And those are crimp beads and crimp tubes. And that is what you use to finish off your beading. And we're gonna, of course, do crimping today as the final piece of our puzzle. At Michael's, there are a couple of different ways to buy crimps. I like the variety packs that have all of the different sizes. So for the crimp tubes, it's going to be a 1, 2, 3, and 4. We at Beadalon talk about them a little bit differently. Here they do it by diameter. So we've got 1.5 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 2.5 millimeter, and 3 millimeter, which roughly corresponds to how we recommend using for what we recommend using with the different wire. They also have crimp beads, and they're similarly sized, except for some reason the smallest one started a size 0 instead of a 1, so it's 0, 1, 2, and 3. I don't know why. I wish I had a good reason for why. Maybe somebody someday can explain to me the difference in the way that they're marked. But again, 1.5 to 2.5 and 3 millimeters. And a little math will tell you what wire will fit within each crimp. But who likes doing math? We just tell you here on the spool. So a number 1 crimp tube or a number 1 crimp bead or a number 2 crimp tube is what you're going to want to use for 018 wire. And then we'll tell you here on 015, number 1 and number 2. And then where's my 024? 024 gets a little different because you can use a 2 or a 3 and a 2 or a 3 for the crimp beads and the crimp tubes. The back has the chart. Yeah, the back does have the chart. Thank you for pointing that out, Susie. Yes, let's talk about the chart on the back now. You guys are just crack me up. So for all of the different wires here, you have, so if you have the information on the front, but you also have on the back, if you're like, I don't know, there's some reason why you need to know, a different size of wire. We do have the wire on, or I'm sorry, the corresponding crimp sizes on the back as well. The one piece of information that you do have to remember though, and that goes on to, well, we're already in step 3, which is your crimp beads and tubes. But the second part of that is knowing which crimp tool to use. Great question, Marguerite. So corresponding to the Beadalon, I'm sorry, from the Beadalon to the Michaels, I would use the number 2 crimp tubes here, which are the 2 millimeters. So if you're matching them up to the Michaels, yeah, 2 millimeter is what you're going to use. And similarly, um, for the crimp beads, 2 millimeters is what you're going to use. That's going to be what corresponds. And I mean, once you put the wire in, and it's pretty obvious that you can tell if it fits right, if you know how it's supposed to look. So let's talk really quickly about crimp tools. There is the micro. There is the standard, and there is the mighty. And what that means is how big the jaws are here. You want to make sure that when you are crimping that you do not use your I'm sorry, let me start that statement again. You want to make sure when you are doing your crimping, you do not use your chain nose pliers to smash your crimps flat. You really want to invest in and you want to use the proper crimp tool, because these 2 little notches here, the back notch that has the little divot or the little dimple there, and then the front notch that has a round part, that is what is going to give you a perfect crimp and hold your jewelry and make it last and not fall apart. If you don't use the correct crimp tool, you'll either smush and mangle your crimp, or you won't get it closed the right way. So these tools, we put a lot of thought and a lot of testing into making sure that these tools calibrate properly with the crimp tubes, the crimp beads, and the wire. So if you use the right things for the right job, then you will make sure that your crimping goes really nicely. So let's go ahead. This is the time that I've thrown so much information at you. So let's put all of these, all of the stuff that I've said into practice as it pertains to making a piece of jewelry. So I just grabbed some beads from my Michael's stash. This is the part number here in case you're like, I love these beads and I need to have these exact ones. I just thought that they were some really fun beads. And then I grabbed some of my John Bead size 6 seed beads. And this is just the silver, it's a silver lined clear, to use as spacers. I tend to do that a lot. I like to use seed beads as a spacer for um, for my designs. Okay, so I'm just looking for a scissors, so right over here. I'm just gonna snip this off. And what I always do first is I look at what my bead hole sizes are gonna be. It's a little tough to see here on the camera, but I'm gonna choose with this hole size, I'm gonna choose an 018 wire. I just know from having done this so many times that an 018 wire is going to be the right one for this. If all I had was an 015, 015 would probably do just fine for this as well. I tend to go up a little bit in my diameters just to make sure that it's going to be as strong as possible. And I know that these size 6 seed beads, I'm not going to have any problems getting that 018 wire through as well. The thing about that I love about, well, one of the many things that I love about the Michaels beads, the strong beads on the bead wall, is that they tend to have larger holes. And I think that that's really good because it allows you to use wire that's going to be thicker and going to give you a lot more durability to your design. So as I said in the beginning, because these beads are translucent, I'm going to be using the 19 strand silver color wire. And like I mentioned, I'm using the 018 diameter. So I like working from the spool. Who, show of hands in the comments, when you do any beading, if you're making a necklace or a bracelet, do you work from the spool, or do you cut a piece of wire first? I almost always work from the spool. And just really quickly, I always take this part for granted. So there's a little clip that's going to hold the wire in place. I just take it out, pull out a little bit of wire, not too much, and then put it right back on. Yeah, consensus looks like people work from the spool. Well, my work here is done. Class dismissed. All right, so I'm working from the spool. Just going to put that to the side. And sometimes, especially with a new spool, you want to just go ahead and give a little snippy snip to get yourself a nice point. Sometimes when it comes off of the machine, there's a little, after the nylon is put on, there's a little residue. So you just snip that off and get to work. Okay. So I always, when I'm, and we can talk a little bit about design as well. My next class for February that I just submitted, we're actually going to talk a lot more about design and putting beads together and kind of working with color and those kinds of things. Um, and still, interestingly, I'm using these exact same spacer beads in that project as well. But on the end of my design, I always start or end with a smaller bead. I do this for a couple of different reasons. It's just easier to get that clasp all together and assembled when you have a smaller bead here. When you have a large bead, it's harder to crimp and it's harder to kind of get all of this stuff in. It's also harder to do the clasp, in my opinion. Um, I don't know if it's a hard and fast rule, but in my experience, I've just found that starting and ending with a smaller bead makes the whole design process a lot easier. So I'm just going to go ahead and big bead, little bead really quickly. And I'm going to, as I'm doing this, give you all the opportunity to think of a good or no, a good question and throw that into the comments so that while I am quickly stringing this up, I can make sure that I attend and to anything that needs to be attended to. I was talking on, I did a Facebook Live with a designer friend I guess it was last week, and we were talking about New Year's resolutions. And one of the New Year's resolutions that I didn't mention when we were talking was I want to try to be more present this year, and really kind of be in the moment. I feel like we're always planning ahead or thinking of the next thing that we want to talk about, or especially when I'm doing classes, I'm kind of, always thinking 3 steps ahead of where I want to go with what I'm talking about now. And sometimes that means that I don't get a chance to really take a moment and attend to or be present for questions that come in the chat. So I'm gonna try to work on that. The other thing that's great about using spacers like this is when you are working from the cards of beads that are hanging on the stringing wall, you can really make them go further when you're adding beads in between them, especially when you pick up a tube of seed beads. They give such a great pop of color in between your beads, but also I only needed to use one of those strands, and I think I'm going to have enough length here for a bracelet. So I'm going to measure. That's kind of you to say, Wanda. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we're pretty good here, about 6.5 inches. So I feel like I could teach an entire class on sizing jewelry, because it is a hot button topic, right? A really difficult thing to do, especially for bracelets, is to get the sizing correct. So what I did here is I used a bead stopper here on the end of my design. If you do not have bead stoppers, I advise you to run, not walk, to your Michaels, or yourmichaels.com, and grab a pack of bead stoppers. These things are, I think, it's a bold statement, but they might be the most important beading tool that you could ever have, because you put it on the end of your design, right? And then you can pick your design up. I'm not doing a very good job of showing it, and your beads aren't going to fall off. So I know, just from having done this a gazillion times, that about, for me, 6.5 inches is a great place to start. The second thing that I'll do is I will, and actually, I'm gonna do this a little bit better than I usually do it. I'm gonna put a bead stopper on the other side as well. And then I'm gonna see. All right, so I'm looking at this, and I'm using the stoppers to take up approximately what my clasp is going to be. Um, because that is the biggest X factor in sizing a bracelet. So I'm going to tell you a couple of the cheats that I use when I'm sizing bracelets. So you saw kind of the technical part. What I also do is I have a bracelet that is my perfect length, okay? And my perfect length of a bracelet is definitely not everybody's perfect length for a bracelet. I'm trying to not make this an entire class in bracelet sizing, but just a couple of things. So I will lay that out and use that as a guide for my next bracelet that I'm making. However, that bracelet that I use as my guide has very small beads. I think it has like 2 or 3 millimeter little tiny rondelle crystals on it. They're actually rondelle gemstones. So the inner diameter of this bracelet, because the beads are bigger, is going to be smaller than the small beads, right? That only makes sense. If your beads are bigger, it's going to take up more room, once you turn it into a circle, than smaller beads. Excuse me. There are also tools that you can use. I have here a bracelet mandrel, okay? And I think, memory is not serving me right now, that the top part of this bracelet mandrel is the right length for me, okay? It's not the right length for a lot of other people. The easiest thing to do, in all honesty, is actually, there are two easiest ways around this. One is putting an extender chain on, and two is making an adjustable closure. So I've done classes in the past on both of those, but I love the idea of doing a whole class on bracelet sizing. So we'll think about that probably in the second half of the year. All right, so I have it, about how I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to finish off one side. I'm actually going to keep this on, just good bead practice. I probably would have taken it off and left it, but we're gonna show good habits. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to grab a clasp, and I'm just using a lobster claw from my stash. I have a little lobster claw here. And I am also going to use what am I going to use? I'm going to use a jump ring on the other side. I don't always use a jump ring, but we're going to be using a wire guardian today. Really good question, Tanya. I'm going to get to that in just one second. We're going to be using a wire guardian today, and I'm going to talk about why that kind of mitigates my challenges that I have with jump rings. And so then I know that because I am using a 1/8 wire, I'm going to use a number 2 crimp tube, and I'm going to use a silver one just because my design is in silver. Oh, and the last thing that we haven't talked about, but we're going to consider on step 5 on our handout, is using something called a wire guardian and then a crimp cover. So I'm going to pull out a crimp cover, and then I'm going to pull out a wire guardian. I should actually pull out 2 crimp covers and 2 wire guardians, and probably another crimp tube, because we're doing 2 sides, right? So we'll see if those things end up staying there by the time I need them. Okay, so wire guardians are these great horseshoe-shaped little pieces of metal, and they do 3, maybe 4 things. They do a bunch of things. The first is that they provide a little more strength against any friction that might be happening between your wire and your clasp. They also give the perfect amount of space at the end of your design so you don't have a loop that's too big or too little. They also, I think, just look really pretty. I think that they're a great way to finish off a design. And if you're using a color of wire that is not complementary to your design, um, then they will hide that wire. So great. Crimp covers and wire guardians are not one size fits all, Susie. Thank you for steering me there. Wire guardians will go and fit up to, I can get an 024 wire through a wire guardian with a little bit of finagling, but really an 021 wire is going to be like your easiest parameter, or your easiest limit for that. And crimp covers are a different story. I will get to that in a moment. So first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that crimp tube onto my wire. And again, it's a size 2 crimp tube or a 2mm crimp tube. And I know that by looking at the package. And then I'm going to take my wire guardian. I'm going to thread my wire up one side and down the other. Then I'm going to slide on my clasp. And I tend to not leave very much wire, but about, I don't know, what is that, about 2 inches is a good working length here. If you need a little bit more, feel free to take it. But I'm going to thread this back through that crimp tube. And I'm also going to go back through a couple of the beads. I've gone back through 1 seed bead and 1 8mm bead. You could do more if you wanted, but definitely do a couple. And I'm going to just tighten this up just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here with my chain nose pliers, and I'm just going to very gently squeeze the ends of that wire guardian together. I'm not smushing them. I'm just bringing them together so that they meet at the top of that crimp. And I do that because if they stay out, I don't like how they look. And they can also get a little scratchy. So I always just give them a very, very gentle squeeze to bring the legs together. Now, usually you could, if you're not using a crimp cover, just hold all of that tight so there's no space there. But because I'm adding a crimp cover, I need just the smallest amount of space in between my crimp tube and my wire guardian. So I'm just going to back it off ever so slightly. If this step is too frustrating and not working for you, eliminate it. Just don't use a crimp cover. You want to make sure that your clasp is not getting in the way. And we're going to talk about crimping. Crimping is a 3-step process. There are 2 jaws of the crimping pliers. There's a front jaw that's smooth and a back jaw that has a little dimple in it. You're going to first use the front of the jaw, then the back of the jaw, and then the front of the jaw again. And somewhere back there, I believe it was Wanda that talked about the tacos and the burritos. So we're going to talk about the tacos and burritos now. So first things first, we're going to come in to that very front of the jaw and we're going to give a gentle squeeze. And what that does is it turns the round crimp tube into an oval, which makes it easier to do the second step, which is to come into the back here and do a quick squeeze that turns that into a burrito. Now, if it's easier for you to do this without those beads there, that is perfectly fine as well. They don't need to be up there when you're doing this first step. And sometimes it's actually better that they're not because you're able to keep those wires separated in the crimp tube, okay? So I've done that and I've made my crimp into a taco. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go vertical, straight up and down, back in the front of those crimping pliers. And I'm gonna turn that crimp tube into a burrito. So I'm folding it in half. I'm gonna pull the camera up just a little bit. And I am rounding it around and around and around so that my crimp is nice and secure. I'm going to give a little tug to make sure it took, which in fact it did. So I know I've done a really good job crimping. Before I go and string the other side, I'm going to go ahead and put my crimp cover on. Now, a crimp cover is a little Pac-Man shaped piece of metal that just slides right over that crimp tube. I'm using a 4 millimeter crimp cover, and that corresponds with a 2 millimeter or a size 2 crimp tube. Somebody before had asked, Susie had asked if crimp covers are one size fits all. They are not. They are some sizes fit most. So smaller crimp tubes, like a size 0 crimp bead or a size 1 crimp tube, you can get away with a 3 millimeter crimp cover. But the larger your crimp tube or crimp bead, the bigger the crimp cover is going to have to be. So a number 3 crimp tube is going to need either a 5 or maybe even a 6 millimeter crimp cover. And then a size 4 crimp tube is going to need a size 7. I'm sorry, a 7 millimeter crimp cover. And Wanda has a great suggestion. She says, best to sit on the floor to put the crimp cover on. Saves time when you have to pick up the cover off the floor several times or work over a bead mat. For sure. All right, so next step is the age-old question of whether you use a chain nose plier or or a mighty crimp tool to close that crimp cover. I like to use my chain nose plier. I find it a lot easier to do. But you use what works best for you, but just give it a nice gentle set of squeezes to get that Pac-Man to close its mouth. And we're going to go around and over to the other side and tuck that wire in, come over here, take off my crimp cover, and then, I'm sorry, my wire guard. And then I'm going to leave about 4 inches of wire, probably more than I need. But again, before you have done this a million times, it's a good idea to work with a little bit more slack than not slack. So I put my crimp tube on, I'm going to put my wire guardian up and over. And now I'm going to use my my jump ring to close or to as the second side of my clasp. And my jump ring is a little bit open, so I need to grab it with both sides here. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble getting that. There we go. And I'm going to wiggle it back and forth so my 2 open ends line up. Oh, that is it is a beauty slide rule. It's a, what is, it's a, what are these things called? A slide gauge. So it's a ruler, but it's also meant to measure the sizes of your beads. The thing that I don't like about using jump rings on the other side of a design is they have a tendency to open up or not get closed correctly, more accurately. But a lot of people use them, so I wanted to mention it in class today because I don't often talk about closing off designs like this. So what I'm doing is I am closing my bracelet. It is a good idea. Yeah, Laura, definitely a solid jump ring. You could use a tag. You could use all kinds of different things. I just noticed recently that a lot of people do like to use a jump ring, so I've kind of brought it into my spiel a little bit. I'm also going to go back through a couple of beads, and I want to pull everything tight. I don't want everything so tight that there is too much tension here. I want everything to be able to move and wiggle. I also want to make sure that I remember to squeeze those ends together and leave just enough room for my crimp cover. And I can see I've done that. I'm going to go back with my 3-step crimping process in the front, in the back, and then back in the front. And go around and around and around. And give a little tug. And I'm going to come in here and snip that wire. And I have a perfectly designed bracelet. A couple of things that I want to mention. This is where you would add that chain, that extender chain. You could use that jump ring and put a little 2-inch piece of chain here so that you could make that bracelet a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. A great thing to do if, for example, you ran out of beads. I've definitely done that before. I've run out of beads, so I need to put my an extender chain on to make my bracelet a little bit bigger. And again, there are several different adjustable ways of finishing off bracelets, but that is another class for another day. And I remembered to put my second crimp cover on so I don't have an out of an asymmetrical design. And the one last thing that I want to mention before I sign off for today, because we are at the end of our hour, is you want to make sure that there is that wiggle room here in that design. You do not want to come here and get everything as tight as humanly possible and then crimp. Because if there is too much tension here on this wire, it is very unhappy. Back to the beginning of class today, we make wire. So we want our wire to be happy. And we don't want there to be too much tension on that wire. Because what will happen is that wire will stretch and you'll get gaps in between your beads, or that wire will break. Because even though it's got, a 15, 20, 30-pound break strength, you're putting it under so much pressure and then you're wearing it, right? Which is giving it even more pressure. And those beads are cutting through it because they don't have enough room to dance. So for all of those reasons, you want to make sure that your bracelets are not strung too tight, and necklaces also. And by following all of those different steps and all of those different rules and equations and all of those things, hopefully you will end up having a wonderfully constructed and beautiful piece of jewelry. So Felicia, you can go ahead and take that forward facing camera. I'm just going to look and answer just a couple of these questions. Um, Lori is asking you about using an eyelet versus a jump ring. I'm not 100% sure what you are referring to with an eyelet. There are lots of different ways, lots of different clasps, lots of different things that you can use to close off your jewelry. And Rudd is asking about Kumihimo. She would love how to use it with wire and beads. I would encourage you to do a search on the YouTube on on different kumihimo techniques. I have taught a couple classes in the past. That is not my forte of teaching. It's generally not something that I will add to my repertoire, but there are so many amazing tutorials out there that I definitely encourage you to go check out for sure. So thank you so much for everybody for participating today. We had an hour, and there is a lot to cover in that hour. If you have any more questions, again, I definitely suggest a deep dive through YouTube, and especially in the Michaels Community Classroom, because we, over the past over 4 years, have done so many classes on different techniques, and there's always something new to learn, or something new to try. And a lot of this is just trial and error. You find out what works best for you. You find out what techniques you like the most, and what works for one person might not necessarily work for another person. So I always say, as long as your jewelry is strong and not falling apart, there's a little bit of wiggle room. There's a little bit of ability to have things open for interpretation. But the most important thing, of course, aside from making jewelry that is constructed well, is to have fun and to enjoy the process. That's the thing that I love most about jewelry making, is enjoying the process, and having the relaxation and the joy that comes with making jewelry. So once again, thank you everybody so much for participating in class today, or watching on the replay if you've made it to the end of class today. One last plug: if you have made any jewelry from any of the classes or from today, please post it on your socials and use the hashtag. Let's see, I always forget them. I have them written down upstairs. Felicia, can you write them really quickly in the comments? It's hashtag Make It With Michaels. It's hashtag Beadalon, of course. You can always find me um, on Instagram at Meredith Joy Designs. So it's Make It With Michaels. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Make It With Michaels, Michaels classes, and Learn with Michaels. I got to bring my sticky note down here so I remember. I know I say that every time. One of these days I'll remember it. All right, friends, thank you so much for hanging out with me. And until next time, happy beading.